years, most of the Hunters breast screening facilities and cancer researchers have been based in these temporary buildings at the Mater Hospital in Waratah. That's about to change, with plans approved for a 4-storey centre of excellence in oncology. The $6 million Mater Institute will house a breast cancer and melanoma unit and will be the national headquarters for the Breast Cancer Institute of Australia. At a special breakfast in Newcastle City Hall today, Professor John Forbes said that while the incidence of breast cancer is increasing, the mortality rate is declining due to improvements in treatment methods. And at the Mater Hospital, surgeons are making significant inroads.
It's quite plausible that half the women who previously needed a biopsy to find out whether they had breast cancer or not can actually avoid that and have it done as an outpatient.
Until now, if a woman had an abnormality after a mammogram, she'd normally undergo a surgical procedure. Now, using digital and computerised X-ray equipment and ultrasound, a sample can be taken without the need for a surgical biopsy and anaesthetic. And surgeons from Hunter Breast Screens will shortly introduce a technology which, in some cases, will enable them to remove a patient's breast cancer through a 2mm nick in the skin rather than a full-scale operation. Professor Forbes says this represents a new direction in the treatment of breast cancer.
We can't be anything but optimistic when you see the gains that are being made.
Sarah Griffiths, NBN News.
The much-anticipated talks were foreshadowed at a mass meeting of steelworkers 3 weeks ago. Steelworkers are angry over continued delays by BHP in announcing whether they'll abandon steel operations in Newcastle. There's speculation both the state and federal government will come to the aid of BHP and offer it water and power concessions to stay in Newcastle. Premier Bob Carr, however, believes the concessions won't come into play in BHP's final decision.
Ultimately, BHP will continue to make steel at Newcastle if they've got projections of profitable steel making well into the future. And the sort of concessions we could offer don't have a bearing on that.
Premier Carr says the government will do everything in its power to keep BHP in Newcastle.
We want BHP to stay in Newcastle. We'll do anything reasonable to see that they continue to make steel in Newcastle.
Tomorrow's talks will correspond with federal talks in Canberra.
Students at St Columban's School at Mayfield began to feel sick around 3 this afternoon, so teachers called in ambulances.
They could smell it quite strongly in the air, and in fact quite broadly over this whole area of Mayfield we can smell it.
No one was seriously ill. A huge cloud of gas spread across at least 3 suburbs, with rescue services inundated with calls for help.
It was obviously a substantial discharge, judging by the number of calls we had in the area that those calls originated from.
Mayfield residents were overpowered by the strong smell.
I thought, we're going to explode it in a minute or something. And also I have asthma, so I had to use my spray actually, so strong it was.
It's believed the leak came from the Inside Tech plant on Kooragang Island, just north of Newcastle. Inside Tech was cleaning filters, a job it routinely does through the year. A compound called mercaptans was released. Mercaptans is the odour that's added to natural gas. It can cause nausea and giddiness. The company is still investigating why the operation caused such a problem. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
The success of the Sydney Swans in the AFL competition was a huge boost to the sports profile in New South Wales. Swans player Troy Luff from Nelson Bay today helped to launch a program in Newcastle to develop local AFL talent.
You've got to have junior development anyway. Maybe it's lacked a little bit here in the last 4 or 5 years, and if you haven't got the juniors, well, the seniors are going to suffer years down the track.
The program's been organised by the Hunter Academy of Sport. 22 local boys have been selected in the squad to develop skills, motivation and tactics. It's the first AFL development camp to be held in the region, reflecting the sport's growing popularity.
Well, the AFL football in here has grown 34% in juniors this year, which is the greatest growth area in Australia at the moment.
The program will run for 5 months. Vanessa Spark, NBN News.
Defence representatives from 13 countries are attending a peace operations conference at the RAF's Peacekeeping Centre at Williamtown. The 2-week conference is providing training for defence personnel taking part in peace operations. Deputy Prime Minister Tim Fischer told members that Australia may be about to increase its international peacekeeping role. He says Australia is expected to be elected to the United Nations Security Council next week, following in the steps of New Zealand.
When New Zealand was a member of the Security Council, they undertook additional peacekeeping effort. By their decision, the potential is there for that.
Meanwhile, the Deputy PM has weighed in on the BHP issue in Newcastle. He says it's a matter of simple economics whether steelmaking continues in Newcastle. And with his tongue in cheek, Mr Fischer says he holds no shares in BHP.
It's only less than a fortnight since I've sold my BHP shares. I should remain silent. And I notice there's some metal in your microphone, which has probably come from BHP as well. So I have no particular comment on that for at least another fortnight.
I guess does that show though that the opposition's tactics have, to some effect,
Conjure the thought of Brian Carlson and the memory of one of rugby league's legends jumps to mind. He was undoubtedly one of Newcastle's best. From his humble beginnings in North Newcastle, he moved to North Sydney before ultimately representing Australia in 17 tests. Perhaps the highlight, his efforts with the boot in 1959, kicking the Kangaroos to a 1-point win over New Zealand. Carlson died in 1987, aged 54, and each year since, the Brian Carlson Club has presented one of the game's future stars with an award in his honour. This year's recipient, Knights Under-17's SG ball hooker, Ben Donaldson. Donaldson joins an elite group of Knights, some of who have gone on to representative duties themselves, most notably Australian halfback Andrew Johns. Jonathan Upton, NBN News. Cold currents up the east coast may have sent a shiver up some people's spine today, but in the water at Dixon Park, the action was as hot as ever. More than 100 surfers from New South Wales and Queensland are competing in this year's Matara Surf Classic, a time-honoured tournament with an honour roll to match. Past winners of the event include world champion surfers Peter Townsend, Mark Richards, Bryce Ellis, Damien Harbin and Mark Sainsbury, and hoping to add their names to the list this weekend were some of the country's best. Perfect offshore conditions for the start of this morning's heats with consistent half-metre waves. In the juniors, the Mid-North Coast, Paul Evans blitzed his opposition, having just won the Under-16s and Under-18s Invitational Indigenous titles at Fingal Beach. The recent form continued. He'll compete in tomorrow's finals. Some outstanding efforts also in the open competition. 1994 champion Dave Nielsen giving himself a chance of winning back the title with a comprehensive whitewash of round one. Meantime, down the coast of Blacksmiths Beach, some other surfers were trying their hand at the sport, most for the first time. The Disabled Surfing Association of the Hunter region held its annual Surf Fest this morning. Some had the assistance of able-bodied friends from Sydney, while others needed no help in catching a classic. Considering the event hasn't been running for the past 10 years, a top-class field is contesting the Newcastle Open. In all, 120 players, some ranked internationally. Starting well, Castle Hill's Anne Gleeson. She won her opening round match in straight sets over one of the local fancies, Rachel Hollingshed. A somewhat harder battle in the men's for Daniel Philpott in the dark shorts and Robert Leisner. They had a marathon one-hour duel on one of the outer courts, and despite being down 2-1, Philpott from Wallsend finished too strongly to win 3-2. And outdoors at Townsend Oval this afternoon, Merriweather thumped Belmont in the Newcastle cricket competition. Set 370 for victory. Belmont was bowled out for 254, but there was one highlight for the visitors, a great dig of 75 for opening batsman Paul Monaco. Mustang Ranch paid $7.30 and $2 even, the trifecta $913.90. Now to the first of Max Lee's winner, Ruffles. $8, $6 and $1, $12.60 and $3.60 for the winner. The trifecta paid $1,613.40. The Broadmeadow double came up in the fifth. Chlorophyll started the favourite, paying $2.70 and $1.50, $1.90 and $3.60. The Quinella $5.70 and the trifecta $110.10.
The 65-strong international field struggled in raining and icy conditions for the 131-kilometre stage from Hornsby to Warners Bay, winding its way along the Old Pacific Highway. Race leader Jay Sweet was struggling after a flat tyre saw him miss the first break and needing help from his team. But two of his teammates found themselves in need of help after being involved in a pile-up at the back of the bunch. At the finish in Warners Bay, the final sprint by Jan Koorts proved too strong for rivals, and he took a win as well as the overall race lead, with Voigt second and Martin in third place. The main bunch came home 56 seconds behind after closing the gap in the final kilometres. And this afternoon in Newcastle, stage 3 of the Classic, a 30-kilometre criterium. Leader Jan Koorts again the front runner as he went on to score his second win of the day.
It was actually one of the shortest legs of the Commonwealth Bank Cycle Classic, 81 kilometres from Newcastle north to Nelson Bay. A big double yesterday in the road race and Newcastle Criterium had Dutchman Jan Kurtz wearing the yellow jersey, and with the help of his consistent teammates, again he was one of the front runners. But also making himself known up front was English cyclist Jeremy Hunt, and he won the sprint to the finish. Hunt first, the Czech Republic's Thomas Konečný second, but replay suggested the Englishman used unfair tactics in the run home by impeding his challenger's progress. After more than half an hour's deliberation, race officials changed the placings. Hunt relegated to second, he won't appeal. A fourth for Jan Kurtz was enough to keep the lead.
Developed. The fact that there's a freeway there now means
also there is
spoken in Parliament, wrote a succession of letters to them. Anyone can apply for and be successful in receiving all the community, or indeed to the owners for that matter, because anyone can apply for an exploration.
Produce from Newcastle's fruit and vegetable markets is trucked to all parts of the state. Now 2 semi-trailers loaded with local produce will be travelling to inner Sydney each day as part of a multi-million-dollar deal.
The contract involved Newcastle markets supplying the largest inner-city hospitals in New South Wales, including Concord and Prince Alfred.
Newcastle won the contract from the Sydney markets. Mr Holmes says it's a vote of confidence for regional producers as well as a financial coup.
The boost will be to the turnover here at the Newcastle markets. The boost will be to local growers who supply produce to the Newcastle markets. The boost will be to small business in Newcastle.
The Newcastle market will also tender for the Long Bay Jail contract in Sydney. Karl Stockhausen, formerly from Germany, has been sipping Chardonnays and Rieslings for 25 years in pursuit of the perfect drop. He's one of 3 judges facing a tough but rewarding job. 22 small winemakers have entered the competition and the class system helps.
Semi-young in one class, you've got younger wines in one and older ones in another. So that makes it a bit easier for us.
The grapes must be fermented in a winery whose crush does not exceed 600 tonnes. Judges smell and taste each wine before marking its colour and condition and tally up their results.
Once the marks have been appointed, we then get together and compare the marks before we do have any discussion about any of the wines. And mostly we agree and we say, well, this is absolutely a terrific wine.
The winning entries will be toasted at an awards night on Thursday. Vanessa Spark, NBN News. The dispute over these calm waters runs deep, with accusations that powerboats are slicing through the algal blooms in the river. The Streamwatch project will undertake the important task of testing the Williams River to find out its state of health.
We've been catching bugs to try and see how many bugs we get, and the more bugs we get in our river, the healthier it is.
Students from Clarencetown Public School fossicked through reeds, mud and clay to find creatures for testing. It was a common cause that united the Waterways Authority, Williams River Care, Landcare and Clarencetown Ski and Aquatic Club. Groups have been at loggerheads about the use of powerboats on the waterway.
It's the first time that we've ever come together in a joint river care project. It's a very positive step forward.
The students' findings will be presented in a report to the Department of Land and Water Conservation. Vanessa Spark, NBN News. The state was horrified when cab driver Wayne Pearce was stabbed to death by a young woman near Orange more than 3 years ago. The loss devastated his wife-to-be, Elizabeth, who turned to the Australasian Victims of Crime Association, or AVOCA, the only national group to offer support for people like her.
Needed support of people who understood some of the emotions and traumas and stress you're having.
Elizabeth now counsels and supports other victims. She was in Newcastle for the annual meeting of AVOCA to discuss state and national strategies. The New South Wales Government is the only state government in Australia which does not provide any funding for the Victims Support Group. It's a decision AVOCA wants overturned.
New South Wales is somewhat of a national disgrace in relation to victim support. And agencies like VOCA in New South Wales have been frustrated in their efforts to acquire state funding.
The group plans to discuss court support and victims' compensation tomorrow. Vanessa Spark, NBN News.
A ride through Centennial Park is usually a relaxing affair. Not so for the international field in the Cycle Classic. The riders face 30 laps of the 4 kilometre course, Stage 9 taking in part of the route that will become Sydney's Olympic road race. Jonathan Hall in the blue will be pushing for an Olympic ride after returning from a 2-year affair with duathlons and triathlons. He was part of the 3-man pack that opened a 5-minute gap on the field in the middle stages. Lead team Bosk led the charge to narrow the margin, but it remained a 3-way fight in the dash for the line. Kiwi Glenn Mitchell took the stage ahead of teammate Gordon McCauley and a bitterly disappointed Jonathan Hall. Germany's Van Teutenberg still leads the Classic overall, ahead of Kiwi Rick Reed and Australian Nick Gates.
It's been on the drawing board for 5 years, a plan to lower the speed limit from 60 kilometres to 50 kilometres an hour in built-up areas. The limit comes on top of a 40 kilometre an hour limit introduced in some suburban areas. But there's already confusion as to where the new limit will apply. The state government's Stay Safe report recommends highways and arterial roads remain at current speed limits, with the new limit to be introduced to quiet local streets. Councils and the state government will have to identify those streets before the new limit can be introduced.
The RTA, local councils and communities get together to develop a very specific hierarchy of local streets and roads.
Stay Safe committee member John Mills says if introduced, the new speed limit is estimated to reduce crashes involving injury by an average of 520 a year, saving the government $30 million. And he's rejected suggestions the lower limit is a revenue-raising exercise.
It is not at all revenue-raising, so we'd like to see cautions and not fines for first offenders of low exceedance of speed limit, and we also want to see a 3-month moratorium period when the system is implemented.
The report will be presented to the state government for consideration.
Merriweather won the toss and elected to bat at Harker Oval this morning, and despite the loss of an early wicket, Ross Sadler steadied the innings. Sadler was in blistering form. He smashed the visitors to 50 after 77 minutes. The cracking boundaries and hard running at the crease with partner Luke Edwards had Merriweather well in control. For Lambton, captain Brad Bannister was doing his bit with the ball, but a spell brought Newcastle under-19s representative Dwayne Griffin into the attack, and the quickie broke through almost immediately. Some missed opportunities in the field were costing the home side dearly, but 1 over late at the breakthrough for Lambton, Edwards dismissed for 16. Jamie Brazier, the new batsman, Lambton wanted him back in the pavilion, while Sadler continued the charge, knocking up his half-century, then his ton, before going on to an even bigger total. Lambton reply next week. Meantime, at University No. 1 Oval, the opening day's play between the Students and Hamilton Wickham. Last year's Wooden Spooners, Ham Wicks won the toss and batted, and at drinks they were 3 for 133. It was slow going, thanks mainly to a rock-solid bowling display from Uni, Daniel Beckett in particular causing troubles as he put the brakes on the visitors' innings. Steve Spoljaric provided some resistance, but it's University in the box seat with 1 day's play remaining. It's an emerging sport in Australia and one which is trying to rid its old smoky image, but statistics prove participation in darts is on the increase and so is the standard of play. Starting today at Cardiff, the New South Wales Combined Dart Association's annual championships, more than 200 players are vying for prize money, national rankings and the chance to represent the country at next year's World Cup in Perth. With so much up for grabs, this year's event has attracted one of the strongest fields ever. Showing the way in the women's was Sydney's Bub Silver. She's Australia's number 1 ranked player and was rarely troubled in the heats. Also through to the finals, the 2 big draw cards in the men's competition, former national champion Bruce Matthews and up-and-coming talent Jeff Ferguson. A strong wind across the harbour today for the 16-foot skiff regatta, but some saw their chances of victory blown away on the opening laps. The Phantom won the handicap race. The Port Hunter Championships will be held tomorrow. And in softball, a good day for the Castle Lakers women's team. They flogged both Wollongong and Sutherland.
"18-year-old Cassandra May has been grooming and clipping her Swiss brown heifer for months leading up to today's judging.
It is a lot of work, but you've got to do it to be competitive with everybody else because everyone else does it.
Cassandra's one of 70 who's showing their prize heifer at this year's Dairy Youth Fair in Maitland, designed for young farmers under 25 years of age. It's the only show in the Hunter which is open to all breeds of cattle, as long as they're under 2 years old and have not calved. This year's top standard has made judging a challenge, the high number of entries pointing to a bright future in dairying.
Well, it's the future of the industry, and I think a day like today is probably more important for the industry than probably many other events.
Vanessa Spark, NBN News.